right, welcome everyone. People are just joining us and coming into the room. We've got about 45 people so far, which is amazing. We're going to give it about one more minute to get more folks into the room before we start. So thank you so much for coming, everyone. And while we're giving it a minute, grab a beverage, grab a pad of paper, or open up a new tab in your computer so you can take notes. We're going to have a lot of great information today. All right. We've got about 48 people in the room, which is super exciting. So let's get started. Welcome everyone to the 10,000 Degrees Resume Refresh event for 2022. My name is Gwen Snyder. I'm the Career Success Manager here at 10,000 Degrees, and I will be your host and facilitator for our event this evening. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure that you are taking notes. Feel free to drop questions in the chat, or there's also a Q&A button, and we are going to do our best to review all of those questions, answer them for you, especially at the end. So really quickly, why are we here? All of you are here tonight because you know that resumes are really important, right? Especially when it comes to part-time jobs, internships, or especially full-time jobs when you graduate. Even a majority of graduate school programs require a resume with the application. So resumes are very much a necessary part of your career path and professional growth, especially while you're in college. And it's the question that I get time and time again. So that's what we're going to discuss today. All things resume with a great panel of professionals. We're going to answer your questions so that you can take your resume a level up. All right. As far as our flow of the day, just really quickly, we're going to get into intros of our panelists in just a moment. We'll do a quick pulse check to see how everybody's doing in the room. And then we're actually going to review student example resumes. These are real resumes from students at 10,000 Degrees. Our panelists are going to provide detailed feedback on each resume. So please note with these resumes, I have consent from the students to use their resumes, and I've changed all of their names and identifying information, all right? And also, I chose these resumes because they really reflect what I see every day from y'all. They really, I feel, represent the typical resume that I get. So I thought that this would be really great. These examples would be really great for y'all to see. All right. And again, after each of our panelists reviews the resume, we are going to do a Q&A at the close of our session. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to ask questions. Make sure to put it into the chat and also into the Q&A button. And with that, we're going to start with introductions. Joyce, go ahead and get us started.
Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And thank you to the 10,000 Degrees for, helping or inviting me to be a panelist. Fun fact, I actually was a scholar just last year. So I'm really excited to now be back, helping, give back to the community. I completed 2 summer internships with First Republic Bank, and I am now a full-time campus recruiting coordinator with the same team that I was with, during my internship. I just graduated from UC San Diego in 2021. So very, very excited for this, very recent development. During my time, at First Republic Bank, I've helped the team really develop our internship program, and what that means, fostering these relationships with our community partners, with our with the universities, with our colleges, but also I do a lot of resume reviewing. So, any of our applicants that apply, I review their resumes and I put them forward with the hiring managers, just a lot of that candidate experience. So I do feel, equipped to give some of the feedback on the resume. So I'm just, again, very excited to be here tonight.
And Debbie, did you want to do your intro?
Yes, sorry. Even after 2 years, finding the mute button, always an issue. Hi, my name is Debbie Dees. I am the Director of Student Services for the University of California, Washington program. It's a program in Washington, D.C., where we take students from all 9 of the undergraduate UC campuses, and students come to D.C. to do internships and live in our building and take classes. So I always like to give the disclaimer that I do not help students find the internships. We have a whole team that does that. But one of the things that has been a long time passion for mine for the entire time that I've been working in student affairs, which is about probably as long as many of you have been alive, has been career development. And so things like resumes, cover letters, interviewing, how you present yourself, that sort of thing. I got interested in it when I was applying to grad school. So like Gwen was talking about earlier, in many cases, applying to grad school can be much like doing a job search. And I had the fortune of having a former HR exec coach me on my process. And I've just had a lot of success since then. And it's always, since that time, it's always just been something I've been incredibly interested in. So I do a lot of individual research. I talk to a lot of people like Joyce. I love recruiters, and I talk to recruiters all the time to learn about the kinds of things that they're looking for. And so I'm really excited to be with y'all tonight and share some of the things that I have learned about.
Thank you so much for those great introductions, and welcome panelists. So now, before we get into the actual resumes, let's do a quick poll. We're going to do a quick pulse check and see where you all are at today in terms of how you're feeling about resumes. So the poll should be up on your screen now. It's anonymous, pretty simple question. How do you feel about your current resume? Please answer that for us. Ooh, getting lots of responses. Thank you so much. So it looks like we're getting a lot of people saying it's just okay, which is cool. You are in the right place to improve that resume. All right, great. And then another chunk of you wants help, which is great. I mean, for all of you, being here is going to absolutely help you with your resume, cover letter, and also interview skills with the things that you learn along the way. So amazing. All right, thanks for participating in our poll. And now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of our presentation. We're going to show our first sample resume. We're going to get that up on the screen. And Joyce, take it away. Let us know your feedback and your impressions of this resume.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Len. So, my first impression of this is that, well, let me recheck. First of all, it's great that you have something, because I find that the hardest step is usually, just getting started. But once you get the ball moving, it really does become easier. So, props to, whoever created this resume. And, first impressions do matter a lot. So from the first look, what I see is that, there are a couple of typos, the formatting, there's some formatting issues in the sense that not everything is the same font, the same size. And as a recruiter, that matters a lot, especially in the different industries that you want to go into. So, for example, if this was a resume for a business, I can see that it's not too professional due to the fact that, again, not everything is aligned perfectly. And I will say that when I'm reviewing resumes, the average time that I take to look at one is around 5 to 6 seconds, which I know it hurts because you spend so much time, putting in all of these efforts. But at the end of the day, right, like that first look matters so much. So always make sure that your format is first aligned. Everything is the same font as well as the same size. Let's see what else. So it's great. You have your name, you have your telephone number and your contact information. I do think that you could align it better to take up less space, because in a resume, especially as you gain more experience, what I like to call it is, real estate in this one sheet of paper, because especially when you're early in your career, you want to avoid going to more than one page. So you do want to keep everything, again, in one page. So really use all of that real estate to your advantage. So I see that there's some possibilities that you can reformat, put your name as well as your contact information a little bit more tight together. Moving down to the education section. Great. I see that, City College, San Francisco, comma, May 28th. I'm not sure if that maybe is, the date that you expect to graduate, but there's some inconsistencies as you already say that May 2021 to present. So just make sure that everything is consistent. It does show that, transferring for a bachelor's degree in criminology. I do advise, and again, this is my personal opinion, right, that I do advise that you should put your current, associate degrees that you're pursuing instead of, what you'll be planning to do in the future. Again, that's a personal opinion. In terms of skills, I do think that you can put in a lot of the more technical skills. I mean, I'm sure everyone here, not to retract, maybe you've had some experience with Word, maybe some experience with Excel, right? Maybe if you're into graphic design, maybe that you've had experience with Adobe or Canva, right? Really including a lot of those technical skills, because that's in a lot of the roles nowadays, they're looking for someone who's, computer proficient. So I would definitely include that. Let's see. And if I'm going too fast, please feel free to stop me. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Let's see. Work experience. So it's great, right? Like any experience is experience. So definitely put everything in there. And I am always a huge advocate that any experience that you have, you can always tweak it to fit, the job description. So for example, I see that this person, worked as a KFC cashier. You can definitely plug in those customer service skills, the level of attention that you did, the time management. So really elaborating on that, because once again, any experience is experience. So you can definitely put it on there. Just make sure to find some way to relate it to the company as well as the job description. In terms of the formatting that I see here, I see that you were an intern with Future Leaders Organizing Work, as well as you work for KFC. Just make that very clear in the sense that put some separation between that. So there's some reformatting issues that need to, happen. So I would put, intern, like the title, the company that you worked for, the position, the dates that you were an intern for, and then below, I would do around 3 to 4 bullet points on your responsibilities. And then I would do KFC cashier, right? So really making sure that there's a separation between those two experiences, because from the first impression, when I looked at it, I was personally pretty confused since I wasn't sure what, KFC cashier had to do with the public authority, right? It was not logical for me. And once again, first impressions matter a lot because I'm looking at your application for like 5 to 6 seconds. So it really needs to pack a punch in that first, first look. Let's see. In terms of the bullet points, once again, great job, even getting started, just having something down, that's always the hardest step. So now we work on, really refining what those bullet points say. So instead of saying, let's see, provider working with older people, right? Like really expand on those responsibilities. Like, what do you do working with these older people? Like, do you help, with data analysis? Maybe you helped with like the time management. Then maybe you helped manage a project or something, or you took care of someone, right? Again, it really just matters based on their responsibilities. Learning about water conservation, groundwater projects. Yep, so really just making sure, again, that everything does make sense and it's stated specifically about what each role, what your responsibilities were in each of these roles. Let's see.
Joyce, we have
just going back to, again, those. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I'm just going 10 miles per minute.
You are doing great. And on this note, we do have a question about, should you only list jobs if they relate to the job that you're applying for? So as you're going through this work experience section, should you only list jobs if they relate to the job that you're applying for?
That is a great question. So my answer is that it depends. Because, for example, maybe you have customer service experience, like retail experience, and maybe you haven't gotten the chance to get involved with too many clubs, then yes, I would say go ahead and just put it down to show that you're involved and that you're taking, those next steps towards, exploring new opportunities. So definitely put it down. But I will say that if you are part of different clubs, right, if you're part of like different things, like definitely put that forward, because someone who reviews resumes, I'm constantly looking to for someone who shows that passion for the role. So for example, I work in a bank, and we are very focused obviously in the finance and the business industry. So I'm always looking for someone, maybe, you're part of a club, at your university, at your college, you have a leadership position. So definitely include that. So it really just depends based on what role you're applying to and your level of experience. But I will say that we've had so many candidates who have successfully, gotten hired as an intern or as a full-time colleague, who just listed all of their customer service experience, and we thought, okay, that could be a great fit. So again, it really just depends. I think what really makes it or breaks it is that your bullet points should really be specific about what you did in that role and how they can relate to this new opportunity that you're applying to. So there's always a way. I see there's another question. Yes, so I like that. I like that you're using the word real estate. If it helps you in terms of the opportunity that you're looking for, absolutely. It's really just up to you to decide on what you can put. I've had a lot of candidates who do put down there that they, went to community college first and then transfer to a 4-year, but I've had some who just, do their 4-year degree. So again, it's up to you to decide. But I do think that if your major supports the opportunity that you're applying for, why not? But if you're running out of real estate, again, that's up to you to decide. Okay, what's the smallest font you can use on a resume? Yes, so as you know, real estate is very very precious in these resumes. So I wouldn't go anything past below a 10. I found that all the resumes that I constantly review who are kind of below, who go like to a size 9 font, it's just hard to read. My rule of thumb is always, and this is advice that one of my managers gave to me once, is that if you don't want to read your resume, what makes you think that other people will? So really, that first look is so important. So always make sure that it's readable. The format is presentable, that you're not just slapping things onto your resume for them to take a look at. So really be intentional about what you put in this, because like I mentioned, this is precious real estate. So yeah, nothing below a 10, I would say. Okay, but great questions, everyone. I'm happy to wrap up so I can leave, time for Debbie to do her review. Let's see what else I had on my notes. Yeah, so again, just really specifying and expanding on these bullet points, making sure that everything is concise. In terms of projects, I'm always a huge advocate. Maybe you don't have that work experience, you haven't been a part of any club. If you have any projects that you took the lead on, put them on, right? You never know what an opportunity is seeking. Maybe they're looking for someone who's an entrepreneur, and maybe you started a side business. Or maybe they're looking for someone with some coding abilities, and you did a project to support that, right? So again, any experience is experience. Let's see. In terms of references, I personally feel like it's not as needed, especially for an intern role. But again, it might depend from company to company. But for me, I would just put maybe references upon request or something, available upon request. But it's certainly not needed, at least from my experience. Let's see. I had something. Okay, yeah, so that was my feedback on this. Great work, like great start. I definitely think that it could be better. and just really making sure that everything is concise and you're really expanding and making sure that it's organized. Because once again, I mean, if you don't want to read your resume, and it's not logical, what makes you think, right, that the recruiter in that position that has 5 to 6 seconds, right, to review will. So hopefully that didn't sound too harsh, but that's my feedback of it. Are there any other questions? Happy to answer any.
So we just had one come in. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of headshots, I don't think it's a good move to put your headshot just because it's not relevant. And sometimes it can make it look a little bit off too. Obviously not because of the headshot, but just like you're taking up real estate, it's not relevant. So I personally wouldn't put it. GPA, I do think that if you have an adequate GPA, you should include it. I know a lot of the roles don't necessarily ask for it. I know I have some roles that I'm working on that sometimes do ask for it, and if they don't include it in their resume, I follow up separately. But personally, I don't really look at GPA. I just look at the experiences on what you have. Related coursework, yes, absolutely. We have a couple of roles here at the bank that require you to take an accounting course, for example. So any sort of related coursework, it can only help you. What should I write if I don't have work experience? Great question. That is, the golden question, because what I'm always an advocate for is that any experience is experience, and that doesn't have to mean, specific, work experience. It can be, any clubs that you're a part of at school. Like, what kind of things are you involved in? Like, maybe you were an orientation leader. Maybe you were a member at the club and you helped analyze, these different things. So any sort of involvement and projects that you have, even the fact that you're a part of 10,000 Degrees, the fact that you're attending a lot of these, professional development events, it just shows that, you're motivated to take that next step in your career. So again, like any experience, it doesn't have to be work experience, like it's experience. Another one, so only 1 page max. Yes. Especially at this level in your career, which is like, entry level, you're recently graduating, there's definitely ways that you can fit everything into 1 page. And let's say maybe you've had, a large number of roles throughout your life, then find the ones that are relevant. Because if it's more than like one page, it becomes like 2 pages. I've had resumes, some of them are like 5 pages, and it's just them throwing their entire lives in there, which is, I'm proud of them, but it gets to be too much. So definitely 1 page max. Do you recommend a cover sheet on resumes? It depends, honestly. If the candidate for me, if they do include a cover letter, I do take, a couple seconds to read through it, kind of just scan it, see why they're interested. So at the end of the day, like, it can only help you. So again, that's up to you to decide. But definitely, again, like it can only help you. Some volunteering experience is separated. Yes, absolutely. And that's up to you to decide, right? Like, if you want to create that separation, absolutely. But maybe your volunteer experience, maybe, you volunteer at the food bank, right? And you really help manage, a bunch of volunteers, you help, sort different things. If you want to consider that work experience, by all means. And just going back to that point that I mentioned earlier is that any experience that you can have, again, you can always tweak it into, what they're looking for. Maybe this serve a role that is heavily focused on customer service. Okay, bring that volunteering experience into it and tweak it to fit the fact that, you collaborated with, different team members. So yes, you can separate it or you can keep it together just based on what you are looking for. Should we contact coordinators/employers before we put internship/work experience onto our resumes? Should contact employers before. I'm a little bit confused. Do you mean in terms of like references or like networking? Can you just clarify that? I'm not sure how you would do that. Is there a chat? or I'm happy to answer it both ways. I mean, if it's in terms of referrals, no, you don't need to contact your old employer to put down your job experience because you did it, right? So you don't need to contact any of your old references unless you're asking them to be a referral. Then yes, you should let them know. But if it's just, you're applying for jobs, you're putting in your resume, no, you should not. Oh, yep, exactly. In terms of references. Yep. Yeah, so only if you're asking for them to be a reference, then yes, absolutely, you should let them, give them a heads up in case that the new employer does contact them. Even if you had 1+ years in 2 jobs while attending college, my resume would be 1 page. If I did my work study job on the resume, would that be fine? Sorry, even if you had 1.2 jobs while attending college, my resume would be 1 page. If I delete my work study job, yeah. I mean, once again, you can take ownership of what you put in this, precious real estate. If you feel that your work study job really enhances, your abilities in terms of like time management, customer service, maybe, data analytics or whatever, then include it. But if you feel like, it's not that relevant, then no, feel free to like take it out. So again, it's really up to you to decide based on what the job description says. And I see that, so I'm assuming that the issue might be that you're having a hard time putting it into 1 page. So again, there's always ways to fit it into 1 page. We just have to work on the formatting a little bit, but there's always ways. Do we have any other questions? Are jobs like Uber, Instacart good? Yes, absolutely, 100%. So I've had so many applications that do Uber, DoorDash, Uber Eats, Instacart, all of these things. And it really shows that, they're taking that next step, to just stay motivated, right? Like stay active. And a lot of the job descriptions are just, using those time management skills, right? Like prompt delivery. It just, again, shows that you're an active candidate. So absolutely put it on there.
All right. Thank you so much, Joyce, and amazing questions from everyone. Please, if you have more questions, feel free to put them in there. We're doing great on time, but I just want to make sure that our next panelist has time to present our next resume sample. So we're going to get that up on the screen now. All right, and Debbie, take it away. And again, y'all, feel free to add those questions in and we'll answer them as we go along. Debbie, all you.
Awesome. Okay, so this is a resume for Ryan Graff. I want to start with the things that I like. I like that there is no mailing address on the resume. I don't know if people are still doing that anymore, but it does sometimes pop up. Not necessary for you to have a mailing address. Sometimes a city and a state is useful or a country is useful, especially if the job is location bound and they're really insistent on that. I also like that there is a decent amount of white space on this resume, so you can easily, well, there's room to breathe in the resume. You can, read it. You can read it somewhat easily, but we're going to talk about formatting. So when someone is looking at your resume for the first time, you want their eye to travel in a certain way. And I want to be clear about the alignment. So I think Joyce talked a little bit about this earlier with formatting and that sort of thing. So the things that you repeat on your resume should repeat in the same way. And so that's the first thing that I noticed about this resume and how it was formatted, is that the cities and states are all in different areas, and the locations of the job are all in different areas. And the reason that's challenging is because, like Joyce said, she's spending 5 seconds to look at this resume. It takes her a lot longer if her eye has to jump around than if everything is lined up, right? And so that part is essential. So the thing that's really cool is that all the positions are aligned the way that they need to be, but I don't feel like they stand out as much. I'd like to see the positions stand out a bit more in this resume, because the positions are typically the most important thing, because that's how folks are looking at your experience to see if you have the kinds of experiences that line up with the kind of job that you're applying for. The other thing that I think needs to be more consistent and stand out are the headers. So the experience, the volunteer work, the education, as you'll notice, they're all formatted differently. So I'll make this a little bit wider here. They're all formatted a little bit differently. So this one is italicized. This one is italicized, but the words are right next to it instead of coming under it. And then this one, the education, is just regular plain font. So we want to be consistent in those things. Again, the reason that that is useful is so then the recruiter, the person reviewing the resume, knows where to look for the information that they're looking for when they look at your resume. You want to make it as easy as possible. Again, we want to be consistent with the fonts. I think sometimes we get excited about kind of formatting it and making it look really cool in different ways. And I like to say that you really don't need more than 2 fonts on your resume. And those fonts should be chosen very carefully for how you do them. This is, I believe, Times New Roman, which is cool. I think fonts that are a little bit more clean, like Calibri or Arial, are also really nice because they don't have these extra kind of tick marks on it. It makes it easier for folks to read it. Another thing that I'm noticing that's inconsistent about this resume are the dates. So here we have the years listed, here we have a season listed. And I think, no, there wasn't anywhere where there was a month, but typically you want to do the month and the year for your dates, and you need to get as close as possible. This is useful for things like reference checks. It also lets them know how long you've been in a job. Those things are all quite useful. Spelling out things. So the Mill Valley Recreation Center, making sure that people can find the things that you're looking for, and that sort of thing. I would also say being consistent with your bullet points. The number of bullet points is really useful. There's a lot of questions. We get a lot of questions about trying to fit your resume into one page, trying to figure out how to share all of your experiences. Your resume is not about sharing all of your experiences. Your resume is more of a highlight reel, right? So I always joke with my friends that I don't know a lot about sports because I'm just not a sports person. But if someone is playing high school basketball and they're trying to go, play for a university, the coaches are going to look at their reel. And if you are, really good at, jump shots, you're probably not going to send them a highlight reel of all the passing you can do and all the running up and down the court that you can do. You're going to send them a highlight reel of your jump shots because that's the thing that you're trying to sell them on. It doesn't mean that they aren't interested in those other things, but you really want to highlight the things that are most applicable to the job. So those are the kinds of things that you want to include in your resume, and you will have a different resume for every kind of job that you apply for. I recommend having at least 2 resumes. One is your master resume that has everything in it that you've ever done. You would never send that to anyone. And the second one, or the second kind of resume, is your targeted resume that will highlight different kinds of experiences based on the kinds of jobs. Now, if you are applying for entry-level accounting jobs, does that mean that you need to have a different kind of resume for each accounting job that you're applying for? Probably not, right? You would have your accounting resume. But if you also had some experience in something like procurement or buying that was related to your accounting job, that would be a different kind of resume. So it's not that you don't want to talk about those things, it's just that you want to highlight the things that are most important for the jobs that you're applying for. And the only way you're going to know how to do that is to look at the job description. Let's see, what else? I'd also like to see some stronger verbs in this resume. So the thing that's great is that just about every bullet point starts with a verb, right? So part of that 5 seconds that I would imagine, and Joyce can tell me if this is wrong, but I've hired a lot of people. And I'm looking down this list, right, to see, okay, so teach, ensure, prepare, manage, enforce. Do these verbs go with the kinds of tasks that I know this job is going to ask for? And so that's why you want the strongest verbs possible that are the most descriptive for what you want to do. One of the verbs that I don't want to say I can't stand, but I would caution you against is help. Help is actually not the most useful verb for a resume, and it doesn't really tell the story. If you helped to do something, you actually did that thing. So choose the verb that describes what you did. We understand that you worked on a team. We understand that you didn't do everything by yourself, but this is the time to really highlight what you did. So as much as possible, I would maybe try to eliminate help from from your resume. So I will start looking at some of the questions. All right, so thanks, Joyce, for that confirmation about the action verbs. All right, so there's a question about when you should use a CV versus a resume. So a CV is a curriculum vitae, and I have mostly only seen CVs in education, and that's my background. And typically CVs are quite long. They have every class you've ever taught, every publication you've ever written, that sort of thing. So this is a good area to do research for your profession and figure out for your profession, what type of resume do they like to have? And if it's a CV, then you definitely want to learn how to do a CV, but that is it's usually very specific. It's pretty rare to need a CV. Next question, what recommendations would you give to someone applying to jobs in higher education for entry-level positions? Well, this is my field. I would say that for higher education especially, and this may be true in other fields too, but I know this one the best, all those experiences that Joyce talked about, which if you take nothing else from this workshop, take that. Anything that you do is experience, regardless of if you were paid for it, regardless of if you held a specific title, that's all experience. So figure out a way to put it in your resume as experience. But particularly for higher ed, especially if you're looking into student affairs, which is the non-academic side of higher education, all those student experiences that you had, all that leadership experience that you had, all that stuff goes into the resume. And you want to think about, and this is true for everyone, you don't want to just share what you did, but you want to think about what kind of impact did it have. So that's another difference in the resume that we just looked at. There was a lot of what the person did, but there weren't a lot of results, right? So what are some ways that you might be able to quantify some of the things that you did? So what was the population of the people that you worked with, especially if you're applying for jobs that work with, targeted populations? How many people do you think you maybe served? If you could quantify how you improved a process by percentage, could you possibly do that? If you had something to do with sales or customer service, how many people did you maybe interact with in a day? All of that goes to showing the scope of your work. And it also brings me to a point, because I've seen this happen before, unfortunately, about being very truthful about what's in your resume and not overinflating things, especially as you are just starting your world of work. People are not going to expect that you have the same type of experience as someone who's had 5 years of work experience or 10 years of work experience. They're going to expect that your experience is within the scope of the type of roles that you've had access to. So be truthful about those and celebrate those things, and people will give you an opportunity. And whoever the anonymous attendee is that asked about higher education, I think Gwen is going to provide our contact information. I'm happy to have a separate time with you offline to talk about student affairs and higher education separately. Next question. Do you recommend using a resume formatting software such as Resume Genius? Great question. I have no idea what Resume Genius is, and I can tell you right now, I do not recommend it. I think resumes, and this is another piece kind of related to it. A lot of times people like to do really fancy resumes. So like in Canva or Adobe or just any of those kinds of things. All day long, boring resumes will get you jobs. I am a proponent of the boring resume. So open up a Word doc, open up a Google Doc, and the most important button that you will learn how to use for both of those programs is the tab key. So you know how I showed you about the alignment before? The reason those items aren't aligned is because the person who created the resume probably just used the space bar to send the text in different places. If you use the tab key, it sends the cursor to the same place every time across the page. So then it's much easier to do your alignment. The reason I don't like these resume softwares or doing things in, some of these kind of fancy things, one, I think it makes it harder for people to find the information sometimes because they have to sort through all the distraction. Yes, your resume may stand out. That may not necessarily be good. Kind of like every first impression is not good. Your resume is your first impression. The other thing I don't care for about those programs is some of them require subscriptions, or you have to pay money, or you don't have access to your resume later, you want your resume in a format that is fully accessible to you whenever you need it for free, so that you can fully edit every piece, which is another reason why I coach people on resumes and I edit people's resumes, and I do it in Google Docs and I give them full access to it so that they can do it later when they need it. So I don't love those programs. Next question, do you have any recommendations on tools, websites, or apps that can help you format your resume in terms of spacing, paragraph structure, etc.? I would, again, for your field, Google, if you're trying to get into engineering, Google engineering resumes and see what the different formats are. If you're trying to do finance, Google finance resumes and see what the formats are, and then get really familiar with Word or Google Docs. I know it sounds so simple, and I know it sounds like, well, that's not fancy enough, but it's going to give you a solid resume every time, and it works every time. Next question, what should I write on a resume if I don't have work experience and either reference? I just volunteer. Your volunteer work is experience. You are learning how to communicate. I don't know what your volunteer work is, but I can assume, because I have a background in service learning, you're probably learning how to communicate with people. You're learning how to manage your time. You're probably learning how to manage other people's work. You're learning how to do projects on deadlines and, like, manage all the different pieces. You are doing work, you're just not being paid for it. So you have experience, and there's no such thing as just volunteering. That's a pretty important thing to be doing. Oh, so somebody asked for an example of a well-formatted resume. I think we can find one pretty easily. I'm going to leave that up to Gwen for the next steps, and then I'll get to this last question. Would you also say that using color for certain words is not recommended? I don't think it's necessary. I wouldn't say it's not recommended. I just don't think it's necessary. If you have to do that to make certain things stand out in your resume, you probably have too much written in your resume. I tend to not care for narrative resumes. I tend to like bullet pointed resumes because, again, it's very quick. So what Joyce didn't say was she spends 5 seconds on the resume at first, but you got to catch her in those 5 seconds, right? Then she goes back and she looks at more, right? She's not just looking at the resumes for 5 seconds, but the 5 seconds is what has to capture her. And then she'll go back. And when she goes back, it's got to be information that she can digest quickly. Oh, and as Gwen said in the chat, she's including some examples, some templates and example resumes. Any recommendations for resumes when pivoting into new fields and industries? Yes, absolutely. This is the absolute essence of the target resume. You need to figure out a couple of things. One, the language, like what's the language that's used in that new field, right? So for instance, Gwen works in recruiting. I work in education. In education, if I have a project that I have to work on, I'm probably meeting goals, right? Sorry, not Gwen. Joyce works in recruiting. I'm meeting goals. Joyce is probably meeting metrics or targets, right? And so you have to learn some of the language of the new space. This is where things like, if you have access to LinkedIn and you're able to have access to LinkedIn Learning, it's a great place to learn some of that stuff. YouTube can also be a wonderful resource for this kind of thing, to learn the language, because you need the right language to put in your resume when you're applying for these new jobs. I was recently coaching someone who's trying to move from nonprofits to education, and I kept trying to impart how important it was for them to learn about some of the language. And I work in education, so I obviously was giving them some of the language, and their feeling was, well, shouldn't the recruiter, that's stuff that they can look up. And I go, yeah, that's stuff that they can look up, but there's going to be somebody else in that pile of resumes who's going to do that work for them, right? Who's going to look up that information for them and present it in their resume, so it's easy for the recruiter to see them in the position and understand what they're saying. You're also kind of saying to your potential boss or your recruiter how much work you're going to be when you get into that space, right? If I have to give my boss a report and he has to look up everything, I'm not doing my job as an employee. So from the very beginning, that resume, again, is that first impression, and it's also telling your supervisor or the recruiter what kind of employee you're going to be. Don't make them do the extra work, do it for them. Do resumes have to be one page or can it be longer? I would say it depends on how much experience you have. It just depends on how much experience you have. For folks who are just kind of coming into the workforce for the first time, one page. You absolutely can get your resume down to one page. If you can't get your resume down to one page, chances are you are sharing too much information. And I know this is such a personal thing for people, and they feel, oftentimes people feel so deflated when I start removing things from their resumes because it feels like what you did doesn't count. What you did absolutely does count. But again, the highlight rule, you're trying to show them the best parts, not just the best parts of yourself, but the parts that are most applicable. And then all the other things that you've done can inform that work once you're in it. You get to share some of those stories when you're in your interview, showing how you can apply your experiences to the job. But in the resume, you want to give them the most important pieces that are directly applicable to the job. But again, you want to keep all those other things in your master resume because that is for you. That helps you, again, be able to tell your story when you get past the point of they've looked at my resume, they want to bring me in to talk to me about it. Then you use that as reference. So you're not losing those pieces of what you've done, and we're not diminishing or minimizing those pieces. We're just highlighting the things that are most applicable. How do I know if my resume is too much, like wordy or fancy? Oh, this is when we have to get other people to look at our resumes. And even better, if you can get people who are in the field that you're interested in to look at your resume. And, kind of like in life, if you have to ask yourself if you're being too much, you might be a little bit being too much, So get somebody to take a look at it. Have a friend take a look at it. I've heard a recent resume writer say, have a family member who knows nothing about what you do look at your resume and see if it kind of makes sense to them, right? So these are things that might be helpful to you. But yeah, I would say, again, minimal fonts, like maybe 2. And when I say 2, like that second font is for like headers or for your name or something like that. The other thing I wanted to point out about the resume that we saw, in Mario Lopez's resume, that name stood out. In Ryan's, it didn't so much, right? And there was a question about cover letters before. I've also seen where people will have a really cool, fancy looking resume, and then their cover letter is just a basic cover letter, like just a couple of paragraphs on a page. This is another reason why I don't necessarily love those resume writing tools, because when you present your cover letter and your resume, it's a set, right? They go together. They should look like they go together. And if you're using these other programs, you may not have the ability to create a header for your cover letter that matches. It's kind of, I know a lot of people sometimes have a hard time with this, but it's kind of like you're branding yourself essentially, right? Like you are a brand. When I show up to work, I'm showing up as Debbie SD. It's like you're getting me. And so I'm presenting that from the very beginning. The other piece of that is you will apply to some places that are a little bit more old school, and they are going to print out that resume. And so if your cover letter and your resume somehow get separated in, people's stacks of paper, you want to make sure that they know that those things go together, and it does make you stand out. Should I put hobbies on a resume? Mixed reviews about hobbies going on a resume. I think if it's applicable, it could potentially help you. There's some people who say absolutely not. I couldn't care less about that. I think you have to know a little bit about your company and how they might receive that. Although I will share a story. When I was working at the UC Santa Barbara, I interned in the career services office. So I, as a full-time employee, did an internship in career services because I was interested in it. I wanted to learn more about it before I did my job in semester at sea as the career advisor. And one of the counselors told a story about how they would do these job fairs every year. And this one company had it down to 2 candidates. And they're like, man, these 2 students are pretty much, you could flip a coin and take either one of them. And one person points out, oh, this kid golfs. We should take that person. Everybody goes, why? And they go, because that other company that we have the golf tournament every year, they kick our butts, and maybe we can win this year if we bring this person on. So success story with a hobby, you never know. Again, make sure it's appropriate for your field and kind of, what's going on. But don't go to 2 pages for a hobby. You still want to have that 1 page. Should you use different sizes and bold? Bold, italics, underline, those are the ways that you can kind of make things stand out. But again, you want to be consistent with how you do that. So you don't want to underline one work title that you had, and then in the next entry, underline the place where you worked. So you want to keep those things consistent. So then that way, when I'm looking at your resume, I know, okay, when I see bold all caps, I know that's going to be a position. When I see italics, I know that's going to be where the person did the job. So it's more important to be consistent than it is to try to like fancify the resume. Recommendations on choosing CV or resume for grad school. Also recommendations for strategies on how to build up CV while in undergrad. So again, you want to do research for your grad program. When I applied to my graduate school, I did education. So I have a master's in education, and I just needed a resume. They mostly worked with my application and my transcripts to do my admission, but I also did some assistantships, and all my assistantships wanted resumes. Now, if you are going for something like a fellowship or any kind of grants, you may need to have a CV. So you need to think about, what does my program require? And sometimes that's by field, sometimes it's by institution, and go with that. And then I think ways to build up your CV or your resume, honestly, do the things that are interesting to you, right? And do the things that are in line with what folks are looking for, right? So if you are if you think that in a year you want to apply to a grad school program because you want to get a PhD so that you can do work in a lab and study, and that's the life that you want to have, then you need to look for every opportunity that you can to get experience with a lab, even if that is just like cleaning up test tubes. Just whatever experience you can have, that's what you want to look for to put into that space, that you have familiarity with the landscape, with the environment, that you know how to interact with folks who are doing that kind of work. And you want to observe and take in as much as you possibly can. But I think that's also true for any job that you're applying for. So you also maybe want to look at job descriptions that are 1 or 2 jobs past what you want to do, because those things will tell you the kind of experience that you need, so that you can then look for jobs that will maybe give you access to some of those experiences. So I hope that helps. Last question that we have here. If you write a cover letter, what do you recommend someone writes in it? Okay. So cover letters, I want to back up to the question that I think Joyce got was, should you write a cover letter? I think the jury is out. Like, there's some folks who are really enthusiastic about writing cover letters, and then there's some people who are just like, I don't need that. And I actually have a question for Joyce. I'm curious if she looks at the cover letter before she looks at the resume, or she looks at it after, because I have a theory about it. I would also say do you want to answer?
Yes, absolutely. So the way that our applicant tracking system is set up is that it shows you the resume first and then the cover letter.
Yes.
So honestly, it really depends based on the system. For me, if I notice that there's a cover letter, so I first obviously screen the resume, take a quick look, and even if they're not a fit and they wrote a cover letter, I always take the time to still read it, briefly scan it. But
Joyce,
yeah, that's just the way our system is set up.
Joyce is a very nice recruiter, y'all. If she posts jobs, apply for her jobs, because she's a very nice recruiter. I know some people who will not.
We're hiring.
I know plenty of people who will not look at cover letters unless the resume is somewhat intriguing. Which is always funny to me that it's called a cover letter, because I think most people look at the resume first because they want to see, again, it's a highlight reel. They want to see if you have the experience, and then the cover letter is how you explain the experience. So I say all that to say, and I will also say the answer to if you write a cover letter is if the job description says you need a cover letter, write the cover letter. Okay, write the cover letter 100%, because that shows that you know how to follow instructions. If the job has a lot of writing and you believe that a writing sample would give you an edge up, then absolutely do the cover letter. So what you put in the cover letter, it's useful to write, I don't know how many I'm going to tell you, so we'll count it at the end. How you found out about the job, that can often be very useful. right? So it tells them what circles you're running in, people that you may know, connections that you may have to the job, the industry, or the company, right? So that's great. How you found out about the job, a little bit about why you're interested in the job. And you want to, your resume is kind of the what, and your cover letter is the so what. So, right? So your resume is what you've done and the things that are most applicable. And then the cover letter is, well, so what? Why does that matter, right? Why do those things matter? So this is especially important. We had a question earlier about transitioning and changing to different fields. The cover letter will be critical when you're transitioning to a different field, because you will have to paint the picture for people. This is where you begin to tell your story. Now, does that mean that you write them? My most recent job search that I conducted, no lie, I think had at least a 2-page cover letter and a 14-page resume. Just let that sink in a little bit. That's like a college paper. We don't need that, right? And what that tells me is that you don't know what's important, right? You don't know what's important to share. And as a potential supervisor, that also tells me that you may not know how to translate your experience to the job that I'm trying to hire you for, right? You can have all the best experience in the world. I, as a supervisor, don't want to have to tell you how to use that experience in the job. Your resume and your cover letter tells me that you already know that, so that I know that I should hire you. And last question, do I meet with students one-on-one? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Just email me. Gwen will share my information.
Thank you so much to both of you for answering those questions. We're not done yet. We just have a couple more minutes. So we're going to put up our last poll, because we really want to see if this last hour that you've spent with us in learning about resumes has helped with your understanding and will help you write a better resume. So let's get our poll up. Please answer this before you leave. And also, before you leave, what I'd like our panelists to do before we close out is to think about the top 2 to 3 things that you would like to highlight for all of our participants to come away with tonight. So if it's something that, either came up in questions or something that you mentioned that you want to reiterate, great. All right, I'm looking at the poll and it looks like people feel better. People feel like their resume is going to improve with what they learned today, which is exactly what we wanted. So thank you for filling that out. And now I just want to turn it back briefly to our panelists, to Joyce and Debbie. If you could please share with us your 1 to 3 last tidbits for students that you want them to remember about resumes. And Joyce, let's start with you.
Yes, thank you, Wen. So for me, my one piece of advice would definitely, once again, be that make sure when you look at your resume or have other people look at it, that it's logical, that it makes sense. Make sure that there are no, hot pink colors going everywhere, right? Just again, make sure that you want to read your resume, because for me as a recruiter, that will make me feel that I want to read my resume and that you put in work to ensure that all the formatting is correct. And my second piece of advice would definitely be that no resume is the same, because I work directly in the business industry. So for me, it's very much professional, right? Like I want this and that and this. But let's say you're going for a graphic design role, right? Maybe something in marketing that will look so much, so different from the resumes that I look at every day, because in there you have so much more space for creativity. Maybe if it's, for example, a technical role, you will include a lot of projects. Maybe if you want to go into the medical field, you will include a lot of the research that you did, a lot of that lab assistant work. So again, no resume is the same, but as long as you're taking that step in the right direction to learn what your industry is seeking, like that's the hardest part, just getting the ball moving.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Excellent. And Debbie, what are your pearls of wisdom for our students before we close?
Yeah, I'm going to say, with the exception of things like design, and this is the one thing I'm going to tell you, boring resumes get people jobs all day, every day. You do not have to go overboard on your resume. Keep that thing boring and clear and easy to read. Boring resumes, I'm a fan.
Thank you so much to both of our amazing panelists, Debbie and Joyce. You have provided so much useful and helpful information for all of our students today. Thank you so much to all of our students. We had, about between 40 to about 50-ish students stick with us the entire time during this event, which is amazing. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. And thank you so much for joining us at 10,000 Degrees.